I make a series called Everything is Remix. It's a 4-part thing. There's 3 parts out right now. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it on the web for free. I recommend it. I'm not biased. I think it's great. You should check it out. Best way to introduce it, I think, is just to play a little bit of part 1. Remix. To combine or edit existing materials to produce something new. The term remix originally applied to music. It rose to prominence late last century during the heyday of hip-hop, the first popular music form to incorporate sampling from existing recordings. Early example, the Sugar Hill Gang samples the bass riff from Chic's Good Times in the 1979 hit Rapper's Delight.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet.
Since then, that same bass line has been sampled dozens of times.
Good life, no stripe, real nice. And I'm a papa, my son Trey.
Eu sou velho caderninho de telefone com o nome e o número de monte de mulher e ele vai ligar.
Skip ahead to the present and anybody can remix anything, music, video, photos, whatever, and distribute it globally pretty much instantly. You don't need expensive tools, you don't need a distributor, you don't even need skills. Remixing is a folk art, anybody can do it. Yet these techniques, collecting material, combining it, transforming it, are the same ones used at any level of creation. You could even say that everything is a remix. Remix, what do we mean by this word? When we say remix, we mean typically that you've made something new out of something old. So you took an existing song or songs, you modify them, you combine them, and you made something new. Nonetheless, you can still see the pieces of the old stuff in the new thing. Remix could be thought of as the arrangement and transformation of samples, but I think remix is a good metaphor for any kind of creation. So you're copying things, you're combining them, you're transforming them. That's kind of the basics of any kind of creativity. And this is in opposition to our myths of creativity. This is what we have right now. We don't have realistic ideas about how creativity actually happens. What we have is myths. We have stories, and they're good stories, but I think they lead us astray in important ways. Divinity. I like to lead with a naked man. This is how creativity was conceived of for most of history. It was a divine act. It came from above. It came from God. You were channeling the beauty of God. And this is still sort of an idea that we have now. It's not that ideas are divine necessarily, but there's some sort of heightened accomplishment. So we use words like talented and gifted to suggest that it's something that's sort of coming through you. It's not yours, or kind of channeling it. Then the Romantics came along a couple hundred years ago. Beethoven is an early example. And the Romantics kind of went the opposite way. They claimed, this stuff is ours, it's mine, I made it, it came out of me, it's an expression of my soul. And again, this is still sort of an idea that has stuck. We like the idea of like the singular genius who creates from within and bucks tradition. Light bulb, can't do a presentation about creativity without showing a light bulb. So there it is, box ticked. But seriously, this is our most popular visual metaphor for an idea. So, of course, it's a famous invention by Thomas Edison, but it also represents how we think ideas happen. They come out of the dark, like bam, they just happen like that, they happen fast. The true story usually behind most creations, though, is it's more of a sprawling thing, it takes a long time, and there's a lot of small insights that happen along the way. Les Demoiselles d'Aversion, famous painting by Pablo Picasso. This is kind of considered the gold standard for creativity because it was unprecedented. It was revolutionary. Nobody had seen anything like it. But of course, he coaxed it out of his moment in time. So there are influences from African art in the faces, the shapes of the faces. Shapes of the bodies came from classical sculpture. And he incorporated a lot of influences from his peers. If you look at what other people were doing then, what he did doesn't seem quite so far out. So he was a product of his moment in time, of his network. So those are some of the myths of creativity. So what's the reality? How do we actually create? There are 3 basic elements. So this is a simplification, but I still think it's useful. First thing you need to get is domain knowledge. So if culture or your field is like a language, you need to learn to speak that language. So you learn to speak that language by talking just like everybody else talks. You don't go in there and start fiddling with it and talking in gibberish. You just try to emulate. You try to speak like everybody else speaks, at least for a while. So you get domain knowledge through copying, through flat-out emulation. And you can see this in the career of any artist. Any artist in their early career is going to have produced lots and lots of derivative work. Bob Dylan, for instance, 11 out of the 13 songs on his first album were cover tunes. And he mostly seemed intent on being Woody Guthrie when he started his career. So that was the previous folk icon. He didn't want to be the next Woody Guthrie. He wanted to be, just like Woody Guthrie. Richard Pryor, influential stand-up comedian from the 70s. Pryor introduced topics like race and sex and substance abuse, street life into stand-up comedy, which was kind of a button-down realm for the most part before that. But before he did that, he was kind of a hack comic, and he was really doing kind of a bad impression of Bill Cosby. His early stuff, he's sort of a second-rate Cosby impersonator. Hunter S. Thompson invented gonzo journalism, so he took the first-person novelistic voice and put it into journalism. So he acknowledged that journalism isn't impartial, there's always some sort of voice at work. But before he did that, he was a straight journalist, and in his spare time, he would retype books. So he retyped The Great Gatsby and A Farewell to Arms. He actually sat down and retyped them word for word just to get the feel of writing a great novel. So once you've done enough copying to have acquired domain knowledge, you can then start to produce new stuff through transformation. So producing variations of stuff that already exists, expanding it, streamlining it, making it cheaper, bigger, better, faster, whatever. It's time-consuming stuff, but if you do enough of it, you can produce a breakthrough. Steam engine, James Watt invented this, but he was assigned, basically, to create it. It wasn't just an idea that came out of the blue. He was assigned to fix an engine designed by Thomas Newcomen, and he fiddled with it for 12 years before coming up with his design. Typewriter, Christopher Latham Scholes modeled his initial layout of his typewriter design on the piano. So it had 2 rows of keys, a higher one and a lower one, and that was the template that he started with. And it took him 5 years to produce his version. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb, of course. His first patent application was actually declined. It was considered infringing, and the one that was approved that became, kind of the prototype of our modern day light bulb was called an improvement in electric lamps. So it wasn't called the electric lamp, it was an improvement in electric lamps. It was an improvement of an existing design. They're very time-consuming, but these aren't, and they're major achievements, but they're not new things. All that stuff had already existed, and these were versions that, were like the next evolutionary stage. So for something to be genuinely new, it usually requires combinations. So taking stuff that exists, combining them together, especially when they don't seem to be related, can be a very powerful creative technique. Albert Einstein discovered the formula E = mc squared, but he didn't discover the E or the m or the c, the energy or the mass or the speed of light. Those were, independent discoveries and major achievements on their own. What he discovered was that, they fit together in a pretty simple way, and nobody else had seen that before. Printing press, this is a really interesting one because all these components had been around for centuries, not just years or decades, but centuries, like a really long time. So paper, ink, movable type, the screw press, that their thing, those had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, what Gutenberg integrated that was unusual was the screw press. And that was unusual because it wasn't used in printing. It was used in food production. The Romans used it for wine and olive oil production. So it was a technology from a completely unrelated field. He managed to make it work in his. Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. World Wide Web is sort of like the ultimate combination technology. It's basically a hypertext layer for the internet, which is very much a combination technology. It's different protocols and networks that manage to speak together. And then he didn't even have to invent hypertext. That had been around for probably a couple decades. Copy, transform, and combine, those are sort of the basics of any kind of creativity. And it doesn't just apply to inventions, it applies to arts and entertainment as well. So for instance, in the film Star Wars, George Lucas was, a serious movie buff, and his influences found their way into the film, sometimes in very recognizable fashion. And here's a clip from part 2.
Even now, Star Wars endures as a work of impressive imagination, but many of its individual components are as recognizable as the samples in a remix. The foundation for Star Wars comes from Joseph Campbell. He popularized the structures of myth in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Star Wars follows the outline of the MONOMYTH, which consists of stages like the Call to Adventure, Supernatural Aid, the Belly of the Whale, the Road of Trials, the Meeting with the Goddess, and a bunch more. Also huge influences were the Flash Gordon serials from the 30s and Japanese director Akira Kurosawa. Star Wars plays much like an updated version of Flash Gordon, right down to the soft wipes and the opening titles design. From Kurosawa, we get masters of spiritual martial arts, a low-ranking bickering duo, more soft wipes, a beneath the floorboards hideaway, and a boastful baddie getting his arm chopped off.
You just watch yourself. We're wanted men. I have the death sentence on 12 systems.
War films and westerns were also huge sources for Star Wars. The scene where Luke discovers his slaughtered family resembles this scene from The Searchers. And the scene where Han Solo shoots Greedo resembles this scene from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The climactic airstrikes in the Dam Busters, 633 Squadron, and the bridges at Toko-Ri play very similarly to the run on the Death Star. And in many cases, existing shots were even used as templates for Star Wars special effects. There's also many other elements clearly derived from various films. We have a Tin Man, like the Tin Woman in Metropolis, a couple shots inspired by 2001, a grab the girl and swing scene like this one in The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, a holographic projection kind of like the one in Forbidden Planet, a rally resembling this one in Triumph of the Will, and cute little robots much like those in Silent Running.
So this notion that we are, in effect, remixing the work of other people has, serious implications on how we think about originality, how we think about property, because that's what ideas are considered now. They're considered property, legally and ethically. They're considered to be owned. They're considered to have distinct boundaries that people cannot cross. And this is understandable to a great degree, because when you spend months, years, who knows how long working on a project, you've worked really hard on it, it feels like very viscerally in your gut like it's yours, like you made it, it's mine. But it's not completely, because we copy all the time. We just don't notice it. We're not tuned to all the copying that we're doing. So like here today, that's a big thing that we're doing. We're watching people up on stage, and when they say something we like file it away and use it later, but we don't make note of that because we're doing it all the time. We're copying constantly. What we do notice is when we feel something has been taken from us, when we feel we've lost something. And this is referred to as loss aversion. So when you've got your thing, you feel like it's yours, and somebody else copies it, you feel like they've taken something from you. And we get, real territorial about that. So the couple things here that are distorting our view here, our perspective. First one is this lone creator myth, this Beethoven-ish type figure. This is an idea that I think is kind of arcing. Maybe it's starting to go into decline because we are so networked now. Everybody is aware of how networked we are. So it's perhaps an idea that's in decline. It's still popular in the culture at large, I think, but I'm trying, with this project and with these talks to kind of give it another nudge towards the door. Ideas are property. This is the second distortion, so this is a big one. This is a huge problem, or obstacle at the very least, because it's ingrained into our commerce, into our economy, into our law, and it's really troublesome to integrate into a system like that, because it's so difficult to see where one idea ends and the other begins. Ideas are layered on top of each other, they're interwoven. It's very hard to tell where one begins and one ends. Ideas contain other ideas. That's how we make them. We build ideas out of old ideas. One last illustration here from the series is from part 3, and this shows how Apple designed the original Macintosh based on the work of Xerox.
Eventually, Apple got a load of the Alto and later released not one, but 2 computers with graphical interfaces, the Lisa and its more successful follow-up, the Macintosh. The Alto was never a commercial product, but Xerox did release a system based on it in 1981, the Star 8010, 2 years before the Lisa, 3 years before the Mac.
It was the star and the alto that served as the foundation for the Macintosh. The Xerox Star used a desktop metaphor with icons for documents and folders. It had a pointer, scroll bars, and pop-up menus. These were huge innovations, and the Mac copied every one of them. But it was the first combination it incorporated that set the Mac on a path towards long-term success. Apple aimed to merge the computer with the household appliance. The Mac was to be a simple device, like a TV or a stereo. This was unlike the Star, which was intended for professional use and vastly different from the cumbersome command-based systems that dominated the era. The Mac was for the home, and this produced a cascade of transformations. Firstly, Apple removed one of the buttons on the mouse to make its novel pointing device less confusing. Then they added the double click for opening files. The Star used a separate key to open files. The Mac also let you drag icons around and move and resize windows. The Star didn't have drag and drop. You moved and copied files by selecting an icon, pressing a key, then clicking a location. And you resized windows with a menu. The Star and the Alto both featured pop-up menus, but because the location of these would move around the screen, the user had to continually reorient. The Mac introduced the menu bar, which stayed in the same place no matter what you were doing. And the Mac added the trash can to make deleting files more intuitive and less nerve-wracking. And lastly, through compromise and clever engineering, Apple managed to pare the Mac's price down to $2,500. Still pretty expensive, but much cheaper than the $10,000 Lisa or the $17,000 Star. But what started it all was the graphical interface merged with the idea of the computer as household appliance. The Mac is a demonstration of the explosive potential of combinations. The Star and the Alto, on the other hand, are the products of years of elite research and development. They're a testament to the slow power of transformation. But of course, they too contain the work of others. The Alto and the Star are evolutionary branches that lead back to the NLS system, which introduced Windows and the mouse, to Sketchpad, the first interactive drawing application, and even back to the Memex, a concept resembling the modern PC decades before it was possible. I'll draw to a close with this quote. I really like this. It's kind of at the heart of what I'm trying to do. Charles B. Willey is a sociologist at Harvard. By idolizing those whom we honor, we do a disservice both to them and to ourselves. We fail to recognize that we could go and do likewise. So that's kind of at the heart of what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to diminish the accomplishments of these people that are in the series, but I am trying to show that it's not magic. The stuff doesn't come from nowhere. It's work. And when somebody uploads a silly little remix video to YouTube, they're dipping a toe in the same pool as all these people. Copy, transform, and combine. Those are kind of like the ABCs of creativity, and I would like everybody to know that. If you'd like to see the full series, you can check me out at EverythingisaRemix.info. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.